She didn't know who he was. Not when he stopped in front of her flower stand, not when he looked at her as if something inside him had just cracked. She was just Helena, the woman who had stood on the same corner for 5 years, rain or shine, selling flowers with soft eyes and a quiet kind of strength. People passed by her every day, barely noticing, but those who stopped, even once, rarely forgot her. Her hands always smelled of soil. Her apron was always stained with green and earth. And her smile had the kind of gentleness that could disarm even the most bitter of mornings. That day the sun rose soft. Golden light spilled over the sidewalk, catching the dew still clinging to her bouquet of daisies. And that's when the car stopped. A black luxury sedan, the kind that didn't belong on that quiet street. The window rolled down. A man stepped out, tall, composed. His shoes too polished for that pavement. His suit too perfect for that neighborhood. He walked toward her, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp yet distant, as if they'd seen too much. She barely looked up. "Good morning," she said, as she arranged a bundle of chrysanthemums. "Are these yours?" he asked, pointing. "They are. Picked and bundled yesterday." His voice was deep, smooth, the kind that usually came from behind glass offices or podiums. Not here, not in front of a flower cart that leaned slightly to one side from years of wear. He looked at the flowers, then at her hands, and something shifted. "Who are they for?" she asked gently. He hesitated. I don't know. Maybe for me," she smiled. Not mockingly, just a soft, real smile. "Then choose one that'll remind you to breathe when the world forgets you." He reached out and touched a single red gerbera daisy. It was bright, alive. She wrapped it carefully, tied it with a piece of twine, and handed it to him as if passing something sacred. "How much?" he asked, pulling out his wallet. She shook her head. "First-time customers get one on the house, especially when they don't know who they are buying for." His fingers brushed hers as he took the flower. He looked at her again, and for a moment, just a flash, his eyes glistened, but he turned and walked back to his car. And as the door shut, she whispered, "People carry so much behind their silence." She didn't know his name, but she had already seen the wound he carried in his chest. He didn't come back the next day, but she remembered him. There was something about the way he held that single flower, not like a businessman making a polite gesture, but like a man grasping for something real. The third day he returned. Same car, same silence, but this time he walked more slowly, his eyes softer, his hands empty. "You again," she said with a half-smile. "The man who buys flowers for himself." He didn't laugh, just looked at her like she'd said something truer than she knew. "Can I get one for breathing again?" he asked. She nodded. This time he picked a small bunch of lavender and white daisies. "You sleep better with lavender nearby," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "You always speak like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're not selling flowers, but giving advice to souls." She gave a small shrug. "Maybe I am." He stayed longer this time, asked questions, listened when she told him about how she started the stand with her grandmother, how every flower meant something, how the weather affected everything, even the mood of a daisy. She watched him soften, his voice, his posture, everything about him seemed to relax in her presence. And when he left, she felt something strange. The street felt quieter. He returned every few days, sometimes buying flowers, sometimes not. He told her his name was Arthur. No last name, no explanation. She didn't ask. To her, he was the man who looked tired but tried to smile, the man who knelt to smell lavender as if it reminded him of something. One afternoon, as he helped her carry the buckets back inside before a storm rolled in, he looked at her and said, "You ever feel like you've built something everyone admires but you forgot why you started?" She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Sometimes I think I sell flowers because I need their company more than my customers do." Arthur looked down at his hands, clean but never dirty enough. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I know what that feels like." They stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels like a conversation. 1 week later, a tabloid article surfaced. Someone had recognized Arthur. A blurred photo appeared online. Mysterious flower vendor caught the eye of the coldest CEO in the city. It went viral. Helena only found out when a teenager showed her the headline while buying sunflowers. "Is that him?" the girl asked, wide-eyed. Helena's face lost color. That night Arthur arrived like always. No driver, no tie, just that quiet presence she had come to know. But she didn't speak at first. She just handed him the paper. He stared at it. Then, without looking up, "I didn't plan this. I never wanted cameras here." "So it's true?" He nodded slowly. "My name is Arthur Del Valle." The silence was heavier than ever. "You're the man with the skyscraper on 8th Avenue, she said finally. "That's not who I am here." "But it is who you are." He stepped closer. "With you, I'm not a title. I'm just a man." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked it back. "And yet you chose not to tell me. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd stop looking at me the way you do." She turned away, started stacking the empty buckets. "I looked at you like someone who chose flowers over noise, like someone learning how to feel again." He placed a hand on the table between them. "That man still exists." But she didn't turn around. "Then let him prove it, without hiding behind silence." He stood there a while, then left. And for the first time in years, Arthur Del Valle cried, not behind closed doors, not in private planes or boardrooms, but on a city sidewalk, with his hands still smelling of daisies. For 3 days, he didn't return. Helena kept selling her flowers, but her hands felt slower, her thoughts heavier. Customers came and went. She smiled out of habit. But inside, something waited, even if she didn't admit it. On the 4th day, she found a single gerbera daisy tucked into her flower cart. No note, just the flower, fresh. She stared at it for a long time. That evening, she went to her apartment and opened the old notebook her grandmother once kept. Between the pressed petals and scribbled recipes, she found a quote underlined in fading ink. "Don't be afraid to see the soul beneath the silence. That's where the flowers truly grow." She read it twice, then picked up her phone. No message, just his name on the screen. She didn't call, but she held the phone tightly that night, like someone holding on to a possibility. The next morning, Arthur returned. He walked slowly. No driver, no sunglasses, no mask, just him. She was placing new tulips into a bucket when she noticed him. He stopped a few steps away, waiting for her to speak first. She didn't. Instead, she picked out a small sprig of lavender and handed it to him. "It's for sleep," she said. He nodded. "Haven't had much of that." She looked at him, not coldly, not with pity, just with eyes that had seen enough life to know what grief looked like. "Do you want to start again?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "As who?" He thought a moment, then said, "As the man who buys flowers and means it." Helena smiled, just a little. "Then help me carry this bucket. The day's just starting." He took the bucket from her hands, their fingers brushing for the second time. And maybe, just maybe, something began again. Not with grand declarations, but with hands covered in water, with quiet smiles, and a flower that didn't need to be sold, only given. The flower cart didn't appear the next morning, or the one after that. For 5 years, Helena had never missed a single day on that corner of Alecrim Street. Rain, cold, flu, or heartbreak, she showed up, always. But now, something was missing. The empty sidewalk whispered her absence like a forgotten melody. Arthur drove by slowly. The driver noticed how his boss kept looking out the window, scanning the sidewalk as if he was searching for something lost. Arthur didn't say much, only murmured, "Come back tomorrow, same time." But Helena didn't return. Not on the 3rd day, not on the 5th. In her small back apartment, Helena let the few remaining flowers wilt. She couldn't bring herself to touch them, not when every petal reminded her of Arthur's voice, his eyes, the way he held a daisy like it was something sacred. She sat by the window for hours. Sometimes she whispered to herself, "He lied." But it wasn't the lie that hurt the most. It was the tenderness she felt when she looked at him, when she thought he was just a man with soil on his hands, not a name on skyscrapers. It was the comfort of thinking she had met someone human, someone honest, someone real. Now, she didn't know what was real, and she hated that she missed him. Across the city, Arthur wasn't sleeping either. The man who had once led multi-million-dollar meetings with complete clarity now found himself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. As wondering why lavender smelled like her. He remembered the way she tied ribbons around her bouquets, how she spoke of daisies like they were children, how she never once asked what he did for a living. She just saw him. He told his assistant to cancel everything for the week. He told no one where he went each morning. But every day, he passed by the flowerless corner of Alecrim Street, hoping. The driver grew more confused by the hour. Arthur didn't explain. How could he? How could he say out loud that he had lost something he didn't even know he was allowed to want? 2 full weeks passed before she returned. It was a cloudy Monday morning, the kind of day when the sky can't decide if it wants to cry or hold back. Helena stepped onto the sidewalk with only one bucket, white daisies, nothing more. She wore a dark jacket, her hair tied back, no lipstick. Her eyes still held warmth, but something inside her had cooled. Arthur had already been waiting across the street. When he saw her, he didn't walk quickly. No drama, no rush, just slow, deliberate steps, like a man approaching a place where something sacred was once broken. Helena saw him, didn't smile, just asked, "Want daisies today?" He shook his head gently. "No, I came for answers, or forgiveness." She didn't speak. Instead, she plucked a daisy from the bucket and held it in her hand, fingers gently stroking its petals. Then she spoke, her voice low, calm, unhurried. "You should have told me." He nodded. "I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I was, you'd see me the way everyone else does." She tilted her head. "And how do they see you?" He looked away for a moment. "Like a throne, a symbol, not like a man." She placed the daisy back in the bucket. "I saw you like a garden, wild, untamed, but with beauty worth discovering." Arthur took a breath. The air around them grew still. "I don't want to be seen as power anymore. I just want to be enough." Helena stared at him, not as a CEO, not as a magnate, but as the man who had once carried lavender in his coat pocket like it was a secret. "Then show me you can water the roots," she said. "Don't just collect flowers, learn to care for what grows." He stepped closer. "Teach me." She nodded once. "Come tomorrow, 6 a.m. Bring jeans and no watch. We'll start in the garden." Arthur almost smiled. Almost. But instead he said, "Thank you for letting me try." Helena whispered, "Just don't lie again. Flowers wilt when they're lied to." The next morning he was there at 6 on the dot. No driver, no polished shoes, no suit. Arthur arrived in old jeans and a plain grey shirt. He looked younger somehow, not because of his face, but because of the way he carried himself, like a man showing up to be changed, not admired. Helena was already in the garden. She handed him a small shovel. "This one's stubborn," she said, pointing to a patch of soil. Arthur knelt beside her and began to dig. At first it was awkward. His hands, used to holding pens and signing contracts, weren't ready for roots and worms. But he didn't stop. He didn't complain. He listened when she showed him how to press the soil, how to water gently, how to speak to a seedling without saying a word. They worked in silence for hours, but the silence wasn't heavy this time. It was full of something else. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. At one point, Helena glanced over at him, his hands dirty, his brow damp with sweat. "You're not bad at this," she said. Arthur looked up. "That's the first compliment I've gotten in a month." She smiled, just barely. "Don't let it get to your head." Over the next week, he kept coming. He helped prune the bushes, plant new herbs, fix a broken faucet on the garden wall. Once, he brought her a bag of soil and a thermos of coffee. "It's not fancy," he warned. She took a sip and made a face. "This is terrible." He laughed, loud and real. She shook her head, smiling. "But I'll drink it, because you made it." That moment lingered between them longer than most. Neither of them said what was beginning to bloom, but it was there. In the pauses, in the soft clinks of the watering can, in the way they stayed a little longer after sunset. Something unspoken. And that kind of thing? That's the stuff roots are made of. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the garden in soft amber, Helena brought out 2 old chairs. She placed one beside the rose bush, the one Arthur had helped revive the day before. "Sit," she said. "We've earned it." Arthur sat without hesitation. For a few minutes they didn't speak. They just watched the way the wind moved through the leaves, how the light danced on petals that hadn't existed there just a month ago. "Did your mother garden?" she asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. "She did, in the backyard of a small house we had before everything changed. And now? I sold the house, but I kept one rose, just one." Helena turned toward him, curious. "Where is it?" "Still in the pot. I've never had the courage to replant it." She reached out slowly, placing her fingers lightly over his. "Maybe it's time." The next day, Arthur returned with a small terracotta pot. Inside, a fragile white rose. Helena cleared a space in her garden for it. She handed him the shovel, but didn't guide him this time. He dug slowly, carefully, planted the rose like it mattered. When they finished, Helena placed a hand over his. "Now water it. Every day, not just when you remember." He nodded, eyes focused on the soil. "I will." She stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. "You know," she whispered, "some things don't bloom fast. They need time, patience, constant care." Arthur looked at her then, fully, softly. "Like us?" She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. Later that night, she found a note tucked inside the garden journal she kept. His handwriting. "You were never just the flower seller on the corner. You were the corner where I turned." And that night she finally slept, with a smile, and dirt still under her fingernails. The scent of damp soil stayed on Arthur's hands for days. It wasn't unpleasant. It was real. It reminded him of mornings that didn't involve suits, screens, or spreadsheets, of something simple, like purpose. He kept returning to Helena's garden. Day after day, he watered, he pruned, he planted, and without realizing it, he was also trimming back pieces of himself he no longer needed, pieces sharpened by pride, performance, and years of protecting his own silence. Helena watched. She didn't rush the process. She taught him how to hold the stem without breaking it, how to dig without wounding the roots, how to recognize when a flower needed more than just water, maybe space, maybe light, maybe time. One morning, as they stood side by side repotting a delicate daisy, she asked, "Why did you never tell me about your mother?" Arthur paused. He brushed a bit of dirt off his knee. "She was the last person who looked at me like I mattered for who I was, not for what I'd become." Helena pressed the soil gently around the plant. "And why did you let that go?" He didn't answer immediately then. "Because I thought I had to. Because I believed that to be strong, I had to be untouchable." She stood, wiped her hands on her apron. Strength without tenderness isn't strength. It's distance. Arthur looked up at her. The sun caught her hair just right, the same hair she always tied back when the day got serious. "Then maybe I was never strong at all," she smiled softly. "Maybe you were just surviving." That day, for the first time, Arthur stayed long after the last pot was placed and the tools were cleaned, not because he needed help, but because he wanted to feel what it was like to belong, even in silence. On the third morning that week, Helena invited him in for coffee. "It's nothing fancy," she warned, "strong like life." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and warmth. The walls held little shelves with glass jars and dried flowers. It was a home that had been lived in, loved in. Arthur sat at the small wooden table. His hands still carried the scent of rosemary and fresh earth. Helena poured the coffee into two mismatched mugs and placed a worn notebook on the table beside them. "My grandmother's journal," she said. "She wrote everything in it. Recipes, flower cycles, little thoughts, and letters she never sent." Arthur leaned closer, careful not to disturb anything. "Letters?" Helena nodded. "She believed that both words and flowers die when kept too long without light." He opened the notebook carefully and read from a random page, "Flowers do not rush, they wait. For sun, for water, for the right season. And when they bloom, they don't ask for applause, they just bloom." He closed the notebook slowly. "I've spent my whole life rushing, demanding results, profit, growth. But I think I've missed the point." Helena sipped her coffee. "Flowers aren't the goal. They're the reward, for those who take the time to grow something." He nodded. "You're the only person who's ever said something to me that made me want to stop moving." She smiled with her eyes. "That's because you were never really moving, just spinning." The words landed somewhere deep. He didn't speak again for several minutes, but when he did, it was quiet, almost shy. "I'm afraid of losing this." "This?" she asked. He gestured toward her, the kitchen, the dirt under his fingernails. "You, this feeling, this calm." Helena reached across the table and gently turned his hand palm up. She placed a small pressed flower in it, a violet. "Then stop holding it like something fragile. Grow it, water it, stay." Arthur looked at the flower in his palm, and something shifted in his chest. Not loudly, but deeply. The following Saturday, Helena returned to her flower cart on the sidewalk. It had been weeks, but this time she wasn't alone. Arthur insisted on helping her set it up. He wore simple clothes, a worn-out flannel and jeans with a tear at the knee. He looked like someone who belonged on that corner, though a few people clearly didn't think so. As soon as they finished arranging the daisies and tulips, the whispers started. "Isn't that Arthur Del Valle? What's he doing here?" "With her." Someone took a picture. Someone else posted a video. By lunchtime, it was on the news. Millionaire CEO seen on sidewalk with mysterious flower seller. Romance or retirement? Helena only found out when a customer brought her the headline. She froze. Her fingers tightened around a rose. When Arthur returned with sandwiches, she didn't look at him. She was packing the cart. Helena, I told you I didn't want cameras. I didn't call them. But they follow you, always. And I live here. I'm not a headline, Arthur. He stepped closer, but gently. I never meant for this. I know, but meaning well doesn't protect people. She closed the cart, tied the latch. I need time. He swallowed hard. Please don't shut me out. She didn't answer, just walked away, the scent of crushed lavender following behind her. Arthur stood in the middle of the sidewalk, the world moving around him. But inside him, everything had stopped. For 3 days, there were no flowers on the corner. And for the first time since he met her, Arthur felt the weight of what he'd built pulling him in opposite directions. The man the world wanted and the man he wanted to be. And they no longer matched. On the 4th day, he knocked on her door. In his hands, a box. Helena opened it slowly. Inside was a small pot, an old terracotta planter, worn and chipped. In it, a fragile white rose, its petals barely open, and a letter. She looked up at him. He didn't speak, just nodded for her to read. She unfolded the paper, his handwriting neat but unsure. Helena, you taught me that flowers aren't just things to be picked. They are things to be earned. This rose is the last piece I have from my mother's garden, from a time before everything turned into numbers and names. I've never had the courage to replant it, until now. If you'll let me, I'd like to grow this one with you. Maybe we can grow two. She didn't cry, but her breath caught. She gently lifted the rose with both hands. Arthur waited, still silent. Finally, she looked up. Come with me. They stepped into her garden. She chose a spot, not too exposed, protected, just enough sunlight. Together, they dug. He placed the rose into the earth. She covered the roots, and they watered it, not with urgency, not with fear, with presence. When they finished, she looked at him. This doesn't fix everything. I know, but it's something. It's the start. That night, Helena placed the letter in her grandmother's journal, right between 2 dried petals and a recipe for lemon cake, and she wrote her own line beneath his. Some flowers bloom only after you let someone see the soil beneath your skin. She closed the journal, and outside the rose waited. It didn't ask for much, just care and time. The white rose bloomed faster than either of them expected. Each morning Arthur arrived with coffee that was still terrible, and Helena greeted him with a quiet smirk. The garden no longer looked like a project. It looked like a life built with patience, with hands that had learned how to be gentle. People in the neighborhood had gotten used to seeing them together. A powerful man kneeling in the soil, a flower vendor with dirt under her nails and wisdom in her words. One morning Helena asked, "Why do you come here so early?" Arthur shrugged. "It's the only place where time doesn't run me." She paused, looking at him from across the rose bush. "Do you still miss that other world?" He didn't answer right away. Then, sometimes, but mostly at no. Helena bent to tie a vine gently against a wooden stake. Because this world is slower? Because this one is real. They sat side by side afterward, sharing bread and honey in the sun. And for the first time Arthur laughed without restraint. Not the quiet, polite kind of laugh he gave investors, but the kind that shook his shoulders. That came from the chest. Helena looked at him like she was memorizing that sound. "You laugh like someone who was starving for it," she said. He looked back at her, eyes soft. "Maybe I was." One afternoon he came carrying a wooden plaque. "What's that?" she asked. "A name. For the rose we planted." He placed it into the ground next to the flower. She read it out loud. "The flower that grew between extremes." She smiled. "That's us." He nodded. "It survived 2 very different seasons, and it didn't choose either. It became something in between." Helena touched the plaque gently, then looked up at him. "Let's make sure it keeps blooming." He smiled, and this time so did she. The calm didn't last. One gray morning, while Helena was trimming the lavender bush, 2 men in dark suits appeared at her gate. They stood straight, hands folded, the kind of posture that said they were used to being listened to. "Can we speak with Mr. Del Valle?" one of them asked. Helena led them to the back garden where Arthur was planting mint. He stood when he saw them, his shoulders stiffened. "Gentlemen, we're here on behalf of the Del Valle Holdings Board," one of them began. "We've been instructed to check in on your situation." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "My situation? Your absence, your public appearances, and this new environment." He glanced around the garden like it offended him. "We'd like clarity, sir. Investors are asking questions." Arthur wiped his hands on a towel and stepped forward. "And what exactly are you asking?" The second man cleared his throat. "Are you stepping down permanently? Is this your new path?" Arthur looked toward Helena, who had stepped back to give them space, then back at the men. "The company is fine. It runs with or without my signature. That's not the issue, sir. It's your name. Arthur Del Valle is synonymous with vision, leadership, and now flowers." The word hung in the air like an insult. Arthur didn't flinch. He knelt back down and returned to his planting. Maybe it's time for the name to mean something else. The men didn't know how to respond. Eventually they nodded stiffly and left. Helena came forward slowly. Arthur looked up. "You heard all of it, didn't you?" She nodded. "They think you've lost something." "Maybe I have." She looked at the mint in his hands. "Or maybe you finally found what no one can measure." He smiled, but his eyes showed weight. "They'll keep coming." "Then let them, but only if you stay." The next morning, Helena woke up to her phone vibrating non-stop. Dozens of messages, missed calls, mentions, photos. She opened a news app and froze. Arthur Del Valle resigns in public statement, chooses simpler life over corporate throne. There he was, on a small stage in front of reporters, wearing a plain shirt. No suit, no prepared speech, just his voice. Helena clicked the video, watched it unfold. "For years," Arthur said, "I believed that power was measured by control, wealth, and recognition. But I've learned something else. That real power is knowing when to walk away." He paused. The cameras clicked. "I am stepping down as CEO of Del Valle Holdings, not because I failed, but because I changed, because someone showed me that a life built with soil, silence, and sincerity is more valuable than one built on applause." Helena's hand went to her mouth. She hadn't expected that. And then he said it. "Her name is Helena. She sells flowers on a quiet street, but to me she gave something no boardroom ever could. Peace." She blinked rapidly. The video ended. She sat still for a long time, breathing slowly, one hand over her heart. Later that day, she returned to her cart. Her flowers looked more alive than ever. People approached gently, some only to smile, others to say, "He's lucky," or "You're brave." But Helena wasn't thinking of the headlines. She was thinking of him, of his hands in her garden, of his silence next to hers. When Arthur arrived, he carried nothing but a small bouquet, lavender and white daisies, tied with twine. He stood before her cart, waiting. She looked at him. "Selling today?" she asked. "No," he said. "Applying." "For what?" He held out the flowers. "A permanent place in the heart of the strongest woman I've ever met." She took the bouquet, smelled it. "Benefits? Lifelong honesty, bad coffee, and very good soil." She laughed, eyes glistening. "Then you're hired." They sat together that evening on the garden bench. The white rose was in full bloom now, proud and open. Around it, new buds had begun to peek through the soil, signs of something that wanted to keep growing. Helena rested her head on Arthur's shoulder. He didn't speak, just breathed her in. The scent of her, soft, clean, grounded, reminded him of everything he had almost missed. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "No." She lifted her head. "Not even the board, the empire, the legacy." Arthur looked at her. "This is my legacy now." She smiled. It was small but full. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. She opened it. It was a quote, handwritten in pencil. "The greatest kind of success is not in being remembered by millions, but in being truly known by one." She folded it carefully, placed it inside the back of her flower journal. "You're getting poetic," she teased. "You're rubbing off on me." They stayed like that for a while. When night came, they lit a candle by the rose, not for show, for presence. In the weeks that followed, life slowed even more. Helena kept her cart. Arthur helped paint it. Customers came and went, but the story behind the flowers was now known by many, whispered kindly, like folklore. She never advertised. He never boasted. But their garden, it never stopped blooming. One day, A woman from the city asked to interview them. Helena said no. "We're not a brand," she said. "We're just people who stayed." And that was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about leaving the world behind. It was about choosing one corner of it to love fully, to grow fully, to stay. 2 months had passed since the press conference. The buzz had faded. Headlines shifted. The world, as always, moved on. But on Alecrim Street, time continued at its own pace. The flower cart was still there, now a little shinier, freshly painted in soft white with curved lettering that read, "Helena's Flowers." Arthur lived in a modest house just a few doors down now, small with peeling paint and creaky steps, but it had a backyard and morning sun. And for him, that was more than enough. Each morning began with coffee, still too strong, and shared silence. Sometimes words weren't needed, because the rhythm of life had changed. No more alarms, no flights, no boardrooms, just soil, fresh blooms, and the sound of leaves shifting in the wind. One morning, an older woman stopped at Helena's cart. She picked up a pot of daisies and said, "There's something different about your flowers." Helena smiled, adjusting her apron. "They're grown with company now." The woman tilted her head. "You mean love?" Helena paused, looked down at the daisies. Yes, that too. Arthur, from a distance, watched them. He liked watching her in that space, alive, calm, grounded. He no longer felt the need to be in front of the world. It was enough to be beside someone who saw through it. That afternoon they sat under the fig tree in Helena's backyard. A small breeze passed between them. "Do you miss the noise?" she asked. Arthur thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I finally know what quiet sounds like. And it's beautiful." She reached out, brushing her fingers over his. "It took losing everything for you to find it." "Maybe I didn't lose anything," he said. "Maybe I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine." Helena smiled. "That's what real blooming feels like." One grey morning, Helena received a letter, no return address, just her name, handwritten in careful script. Inside, a photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photo was old, slightly faded, of a woman sitting on a wooden crate beside a flower cart, her hair tied in a scarf, a wide smile. In her hands, a bouquet of wild daisies. Next to her stood a man, smiling too. Familiar, though Helena couldn't place him. It was her grandmother. The letter read, "Dear Helena, you don't know me, but I knew your grandmother. Years ago I bought flowers from her, not because I needed them, but because she always seemed to know when someone needed something else, something softer. She once told me that the strongest flowers are the ones that bloom through cracks, that real love is like a forgotten seed. It only grows if someone chooses to stay and tend to it. I saw you and Arthur, and I recognized that same seed. Don't stop watering it." Helena held the letter tightly. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the back room and opened her grandmother's old notebook. Inside were pressed petals, handwritten recipes, and pages of unsent letters. She slipped the photo and the letter into one of the empty sleeves. Then she wrote her own line beneath them. "The bloom doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be real." That evening, when Arthur returned from the market with a paper bag full of lemons and soil, she handed him the notebook. He opened to the page and read the new line. Then looked at her. "Is this yours?" She nodded. "It is now." He placed a kiss on the back of her hand, and for the first time in years, she felt like legacy wasn't something you inherited. It was something you grew. One Sunday, Helena arranged a bouquet without saying a word. Lavender, sunflower, rosemary, and mint. Arthur watched her quietly. "That one's not for sale?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, some flowers aren't meant to be sold. They're meant to sit on windowsills." He smiled. "What's special about this one?" She placed it in a tall glass jar and walked it to the living room window. "It faces the street, and I like the idea of the flowers watching the world pass instead of the other way around." Arthur leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're full of beautiful metaphors." Helena turned toward him, playful. "Or maybe I just finally have time to see things." He nodded. "Time. That's what we were all chasing. Turns out it was always right here." Later that evening, they took a walk down Alecrim Street. The neighbors waved. A little girl ran up and handed Helena a drawing, her flower cart, drawn in crayon, with hearts all around it. Helena knelt. "What's this?" "It's you and the flower man," the girl said, pointing to Arthur. "How you make the street pretty." Arthur laughed softly. "That's a first." Helena smiled and tucked the drawing into her pocket. As they continued walking, Arthur turned to her. "Do you think we'll always stay here?" She thought for a moment. "We might. And if the world calls again?" She stopped and faced him. "Then let it call. But this time, I know what I'm answering to." He didn't say anything, but he held her hand a little tighter, and she understood. Spring arrived gently. The garden bloomed without asking for permission. Arthur spent mornings trimming the rose bushes, and Helena arranged little jars of color for the neighbors. Some came just to sit near them. No purchases, no words, just presence. One afternoon, they were invited to a community fair in the city park. Helena was hesitant. "I don't do speeches," she said. "You don't need to," Arthur replied. "The flowers will speak." They set up a small booth beneath a fig tree. On the table beside the vases, Helena placed handwritten notes. "Kindness is what keeps the soil soft. Love is a seed. Water it slowly. The best bouquets are made from ordinary moments." People stopped, read, took pictures. Some cried. One man asked, "Did you write these?" Helena nodded. They were grown, like everything else here. That night, after the fair ended, Helena and Arthur stayed behind to clean up. The park was quiet, the grass cool beneath their feet. Helena looked up at the sky. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Arthur nodded. "And we're not in a hurry." Back at home, Helena lit a candle beside the white rose. Arthur poured 2 cups of tea. They sat on the back steps, just as the wind picked up, sending petals dancing into the yard. Helena rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you still think about who you were before?" he thought, then said, "Only to thank him for letting me go." She smiled. "And who are you now?" He looked out at the garden, their names written into the soil. "I'm someone who stayed." And so, on a quiet street with a slow breeze and a cart of flowers that never rushed to bloom, 2 people chose not to run. They chose to grow, together. And the flowers? They stayed too.